When a young, overworked analyst is labeled disposable by his arrogant boss, he vows to prove them all wrong. Secretly building his own investment firm while still working at his toxic job, he rises from a nobody to a force to be reckoned with. But revenge is a game of high stakes, and when he finally topples his old company, a shocking betrayal from within his own team threatens to destroy everything he's built. In a world of power plays, fraud, and corporate backstabbing, will he rise above the chaos, or lose it all in his quest for justice? This is a gripping tale of revenge, ambition, and the cost of taking back control. 3 years ago, I was invisible. Or at least, that's how it felt every single day when I walked into the gleaming skyscraper that housed Zenith Capital. For a company that prided itself on being forward-thinking and people-oriented, its employees sure had a way of making you feel like the gum stuck to the bottom of their $1,000 shoes. I was a junior analyst, barely scraping by on an entry-level salary. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't expect it to be. I'd graduated with honors from a top business school, eager to climb the corporate ladder and prove myself. I was willing to work hard, to stay late, to do whatever it took. But no matter how much effort I put in, I was stuck. My role at Zenith was a punchline, a joke no one told me I was the butt of until it was too late. "Hey, could you grab me a latte? Almond milk, 2 pumps of hazelnut," one coworker would say as I reviewed market reports. "Don't forget Steve's dry cleaning," another chimed in during an impromptu meeting. That was my boss, Steve Harris. Senior manager. Tall, cocky, and always wearing that smug grin that made me want to scream. He was the kind of guy who'd leave you buried under an avalanche of grunt work, only to swoop in at the last minute and take credit for the results. And no matter how many times I nailed my forecasts or flagged investments that paid off, I never got a shred of recognition. It was like I wasn't even there. I could feel myself being ground down, day by day, in that toxic environment. But the final straw came one late evening. I'd stayed after hours to finish a report Steve needed for a meeting with the board the next morning. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear every creak of the floor and hum of the air conditioning. That's when I heard it, voices, coming from the conference room. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, Steve and the partners often had late meetings to discuss strategies. But as I passed by on my way to the printer, something stopped me in my tracks. It was my name. "I mean, come on," Steve's voice said, full of derision. "Did you see that email he sent me asking for a raise? Unreal. He should be thanking me for even letting him work here." Another voice laughed, one of the partners. "He's young. He'll figure it out. If not, plenty of others waiting in line." Steve chuckled. "He's disposable, just like the rest of them. We'll work him to the bone, and when he burns out, we'll replace him. Easy. Disposable." That word reverberated in my chest like the echo of a gunshot. I froze, standing there in the dim hallway, unsure if I was more furious or humiliated. I'd known they didn't respect me, but hearing it spelled out so clearly. It was like someone had doused me in ice water. I walked out of the office that night in a haze, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. All the times I'd gone above and beyond, sacrificed sleep, skipped meals, missed time with friends and family, all of it was meaningless to them. I was just another cog in their machine, a tool to be used and discarded. When I got home, I sat in my tiny, one-bedroom apartment, staring blankly at the walls. My anger burned hotter with every passing second. The Steve in my mind smirked, taunted me, reminded me of everything I wasn't. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make him pay. But instead, I did something else. I opened my laptop and started typing. I wasn't writing an angry resignation letter, I wasn't ready to give them that satisfaction. No, I started researching. Investments. Financial strategies. Market patterns. Everything I'd learned on the job, everything they'd refused to recognize as valuable, I started putting into action. For years, I'd been helping Zenith grow its wealth, analyzing portfolios, identifying lucrative opportunities, only for Steve to swoop in and claim it all as his brilliant idea. But now, I wasn't going to let that happen. I decided that if I was going to be stuck at this dead-end job, I was going to use it to my advantage. Every spare moment I had, I studied. Late nights, early mornings, weekends, it didn't matter. I devoured every piece of information I could get my hands on. I signed up for online courses, listened to audiobooks on the train, and read market reports until my eyes blurred. It wasn't easy. I was already drowning in work at Zenith, and now I was essentially working a second job. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over something. Like I wasn't just some pawn in Steve's game. At first, I started small. I invested a few $100s here and there, dipping into my meager savings. I analyzed every move like a hawk, making sure I wasn't taking unnecessary risks. And slowly but surely, my efforts started to pay off. The first time I saw my investment double, I nearly dropped my phone in disbelief. It wasn't much, a few $100s, but it was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could do this. Over the next few months, I poured every spare dollar I had into my portfolio. My friends thought I was crazy, living on ramen noodles and cutting out every unnecessary expense, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than what they saw in me. But I didn't stop there. Once I felt confident enough in my abilities, I started branching out. I reached out to a couple of old college friends, pitching them my ideas. Most of them were skeptical, but one or two took a chance on me. They gave me small amounts to invest, nothing life-changing, but enough to give me a taste of what it was like to manage other people's money. It was terrifying. Every trade felt like a gamble, every market dip like a personal failure. But I stuck to my strategies, trusting the skills I'd spent months honing. And when those investments started paying off, the feeling was indescribable. Meanwhile, at Zenith, nothing changed. I was still the guy fetching coffee and running errands, the invisible worker bee buzzing in the background. Steve and the others had no idea what I was building in my off hours. And I liked it that way. By the end of that year, my portfolio had grown to a point I never thought possible. What had started as a desperate act of defiance had turned into something real, something I could actually build a future on. And as much as I wanted to walk into Steve's office and throw my resignation letter in his face, I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not until I was sure I could do what I'd been dreaming of since that night in the hallway. By the time the next year rolled around, I was a man living two lives. By day, I was still the same overworked, underappreciated analyst at Zenith Capital, running around with spreadsheets and coffee cups. But by night, I was building something far more important, my future. It wasn't just about growing my portfolio anymore. I'd proven to myself that I could invest and win. Now, I wanted to take it to the next level. I wanted freedom. Not the kind where you just switch to another job and hope the new boss is less of a Steve, but real freedom. The kind where you call the shots, where you decide your own value. Starting a business wasn't an overnight decision. It was months of careful planning, late nights filled with doubt, and conversations with myself that often ended in me staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was out of my mind. But one night, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by stacks of books on finance and startup strategy, I decided, it was time to take the leap. I drained my savings, cashed out a small portion of my portfolio, and filed the paperwork to launch my own investment firm. It wasn't flashy. I didn't have an office or employees or even a logo. Just a laptop, a basic website, and a burning determination to make it work. I called my firm Vanguard Strategies, not the most original name, but it sounded professional enough. I used every spare moment to market myself. I reached out to friends, family, former classmates, and anyone I thought might trust me with their money. Most of them politely declined or gave me that awkward, "Yeah, I'll think about it," smile, but a few decided to take a chance on me. It wasn't much, just a handful of small clients with modest accounts, but it was a start. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just working for someone else. I was working for me. Balancing my job at Zenith with running my own business was brutal. By day, I was crunching numbers for Steve, sitting in pointless meetings where he droned on about his vision for the company. By night, I was on calls with clients, analyzing market trends, and trying to convince potential investors that I was worth betting on. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My social life? Non-existent. My friends started calling me the ghost because I was never around anymore. But I didn't care. Every time I felt like giving up, I thought about Steve's voice that night, laughing about how disposable I was. That memory fueled me. The breakthrough came 6 months later. One of my small-time clients referred me to a business associate, a wealthy entrepreneur looking for someone to manage a sizable portion of his portfolio. It was the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for, but I knew it was a long shot. This guy had his pick of top-tier firms. Why would he choose a nobody like me? I spent days preparing for the meeting, crafting the perfect pitch. When the day came, I sat across from him in a tiny coffee shop, hands sweating as I explained my strategies and results. He didn't say much, just nodded occasionally and sipped his espresso. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a long, appraising look. "You're hungry," he finally said. "I like that. I'll give you a shot." I nearly choked on my coffee. He handed me a figure that was more money than I'd ever seen in my life and said, "Don't screw it up." That single deal changed everything. With his name on my client list, suddenly I wasn't just some no-name analyst moonlighting as an entrepreneur. I was someone worth paying attention to. Referrals started trickling in, then flooding. Small business owners, tech startups, even a few high-net-worth individuals, all of them wanted a piece of what I was offering. And I delivered. Meanwhile, things at Zenith were falling apart. Steve was still strutting around like he owned the place, but anyone paying attention could see the cracks forming. Key clients were leaving, lured away by firms that offered better returns and better service. A few senior employees resigned, frustrated with the company's toxic culture. Rumors started swirling about layoffs, budget cuts, and restructuring. I kept my head down, careful not to let anyone at Zenith know about Vanguard strategies. I wasn't ready for them to figure out what I was up to, not yet. But one day, something happened that made it impossible to keep my two worlds separate. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a call with one of my biggest clients, a tech entrepreneur whose investments I'd managed to triple in just a few months. I'd stepped into an empty conference room at Zenith, praying no one would notice I was missing for a few minutes. "I'm thinking about expanding," my client said. "But I'll need someone to handle a lot more capital. Can you do it?" I froze. This wasn't just another account. This was the kind of deal that could take Vanguard strategies from a side hustle to a legitimate player in the industry. But to take it on, I'd need more time I didn't have while working full-time at Zenith. "I'll make it work," I said, though I had no idea how. As I hung up, the door to the conference room swung open. Steve was standing there, arms crossed, looking at me like I'd just spit on his shoes. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. Just making a personal call," I stammered. Steve narrowed his eyes. "You're not being paid to make personal calls. Get back to work." I nodded and slipped past him, heart pounding. But as I walked back to my desk, I realized something. I didn't care what Steve thought anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had power. Real power. And it wasn't just because of the money or the success. It was because I finally understood that I didn't need Zenith. I didn't need Steve. They needed me. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my resignation letter. It was short, professional, and to the point. I'd written it a dozen times before but never had the courage to send it. Now, I wasn't sure if I needed to. The truth was, leaving Zenith didn't feel like enough. I wanted more than just to walk away. I wanted them to feel the loss. I wanted Steve to see everything he'd ignored, dismissed, and laughed at, and regret every second of it. That's when the idea hit me. If I was going to leave Zenith, I wasn't just going to quit. I was going to take their clients, their credibility, and their future with me. I smiled to myself as I closed my laptop. The game was just getting started. The day I handed in my resignation, Steve barely looked up from his desk. "You're quitting," he said flatly, flipping through a stack of papers as if I wasn't worth a moment of his full attention. "That's right," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "Figures," he muttered with a smirk, finally meeting my eyes. "Not everyone's cut out for this business. Some people just don't have what it takes. Good luck out there, kid." I wanted to laugh. If he only knew. But I held my tongue, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out of his office for the last time. What Steve didn't realize was that I'd been planning this exit for months. My departure wasn't just a move, it was the opening shot in a battle he didn't even know he was about to fight. Vanguard Strategies exploded almost overnight. The deal I'd made with the tech entrepreneur had put me on the map, and my small roster of clients quickly ballooned into something far bigger than I'd ever anticipated. Every week, I was fielding calls from potential investors, startups, and even a few mid-sized companies looking for someone to manage their portfolios. And here's the best part, a lot of those calls. They were from people who had left Zenith. The company's reputation was in freefall. Years of cutting corners, mistreating employees, and failing to deliver results had finally caught up with them. Former clients whispered about mismanagement, employees vented on anonymous job boards, and even the media started picking up on the story. But the real tipping point came a few months after I left, when one of Zenith's biggest clients, an international logistics firm worth billions, announced they were pulling their account. And guess who they gave their business to? Vanguard Strategies. The day that deal closed, I celebrated with my team, a small but dedicated group of analysts and managers I'd hired to help keep up with the demand. Unlike Steve, I valued my employees. I paid them well, treated them with respect, and made sure they knew their work mattered. The results spoke for themselves. But as much as I loved watching my firm grow, I couldn't help but keep tabs on Zenith. Every week, I heard new stories about how bad things were getting over there. Steve was reportedly under intense pressure from the partners, who were furious about the loss of key accounts. Employees were quitting left and right, and morale was at an all-time low. It wasn't enough for me. Not yet. The next phase of my plan required precision. I wanted Zenith to crumble, but I didn't just want to steal their clients, I wanted to take their future. I started attending networking events where I knew Zenith's current clients and potential leads would be. At first, I just listened. I didn't need to sell myself immediately, I wanted to understand what they needed, what Zenith was failing to deliver, and where the gaps were. It didn't take long to find my opening. Most of Zenith's clients were unhappy. Their complaints ranged from poor communication to inconsistent results, but the common thread was a lack of trust. Steve and his team were seen as arrogant and careless, more interested in lining their own pockets than actually helping their clients succeed. I played the long game, carefully building relationships and showing potential clients what Vanguard could offer. I didn't badmouth Zenith outright, that wasn't my style. Instead, I let our results speak for themselves. Slowly but surely, the tide started turning. One by one, Zenith's clients began to leave. Some of them came directly to me, others spread the word to their networks, warning them to steer clear of Steve and his team. But the real nail in the coffin came when I made a move that even I hadn't fully anticipated. It started with a chance encounter at a financial conference. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about innovative investment strategies, a huge milestone for me and my firm. As I mingled with the crowd after my session, I spotted a familiar face, one of Zenith's senior partners, a man named Richard Vaughn. Richard was the kind of guy who always looked like he was on the verge of yelling at someone, a walking ball of stress with a permanent scowl etched into his face. But as I approached him, I realized something was different. He looked defeated. "Richard," I said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." He gave me a tight smile and shook my hand. "It has. Heard you've been doing well for yourself." "Can't complain," I said with a grin. "How about you? How's Zenith holding up?" Richard's scowl deepened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to brush me off. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "To be honest, things are a mess. Losing clients left and right. Steve's in over his head, but he's too proud to admit it." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "That's tough. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." Richard snorted. "I doubt there's much anyone can do at this point." But as we talked, I realized there was something I could do, something that would not only solidify Vanguard's position as a major player but also deliver the ultimate blow to Zenith. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly behind the scenes, building a relationship with Richard and a few other key figures at Zenith. I positioned myself as someone who understood their challenges and could offer solutions, without directly undermining Steve. Eventually, Richard approached me with a proposal. He wanted to partner with Vanguard. At first, I played it cool, pretending to be hesitant. But inside, I was practically vibrating with excitement. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for, the chance to dismantle Zenith from the inside out. After a series of negotiations, we reached an agreement. Richard and his faction within Zenith would leave the company and join Vanguard as senior partners, bringing with them not only their expertise but also a significant chunk of Zenith's remaining client base. When the announcement went public, it was chaos. The media ate it up, painting the move as a damning indictment of Zenith's leadership. Clients panicked, employees scrambled to jump ship, and Steve was left standing in the wreckage of his once proud company. A few weeks after the deal closed, I got a call from Steve. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You've done well for yourself." "Thanks, Steve," I replied, barely able to keep the smugness out of my voice. "I hope you're happy," he snapped. "You've destroyed everything we built." I laughed. "You destroyed it yourself, Steve. I just gave people a better option." There was silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Good luck, Steve," I said before hanging up. As I put down the phone, I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving to myself, and to everyone who'd ever doubted me, that I wasn't disposable. I was unstoppable. Vanguard Strategies was everything I had dreamed it would be. In less than 3 years, I had gone from being a nobody at Zenith to running one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the region. The media loved the underdog triumph story, painting me as a young genius who had single-handedly disrupted the finance world. My employees were loyal, my clients trusted me, and the money was pouring in. But behind the polished facade of success, there were cracks forming, cracks I refused to see. It started with whispers. Quiet, seemingly harmless conversations I overheard in the office late at night. The senior partners I'd brought over from Zenith, Richard Vaughn and his crew, were beginning to question my leadership. "He's too young to run a firm this size," I overheard Richard mutter to one of the other partners one evening. "His decisions are reckless," someone else added. "It's only a matter of time before this all comes crashing down." At first, I brushed it off. They were jealous. Bitter that I'd succeeded where they had failed. But as the whispers grew louder, I couldn't ignore them anymore. One morning, as I walked into the office, my assistant stopped me, her face pale. "Mr. Daniels," she said hesitantly. "You need to see this." She handed me a tablet, and my stomach dropped as I read the headline splashed across the front page of a prominent financial news site. "Rogue investor or rising star? Whistleblower alleges fraud at Vanguard Strategies." The article went on to detail anonymous claims that my firm had been engaging in unethical practices, insider trading, falsified returns, and backroom deals. It painted me as a reckless, power-hungry CEO who was willing to do whatever it took to win, no matter the cost. At first, I thought it was a smear campaign, maybe even orchestrated by Steve or someone at Zenith trying to claw back their reputation. But as I read further, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The claims were disturbingly detailed. Specific dates, transactions, and internal practices were listed. Things that only someone on the inside could have known. Someone in my own company was trying to destroy me. For the next week, I barely slept. I called emergency meetings with my legal team, tried to reassure my clients, and issued public statements denying the allegations. But the damage was already done. Clients began pulling their accounts, the media was circling like vultures, and regulators announced they were opening an investigation into Vanguard Strategies. Through it all, Richard stayed oddly quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't until I received an anonymous email with the subject line, "Checkmate," that I realized just how deep the betrayal went. Attached to the email were documents, emails, meeting minutes, and financial reports, that proved Richard and his group of former Zenith partners had been manipulating the books behind my back. They'd been using Vanguard's name to make shady deals, funneling profits into offshore accounts while pinning the blame on me. Worse yet, the documents showed that Richard had been in contact with Steve Harris. That's when it all clicked. Richard hadn't joined Vanguard to help me grow the company. He'd joined to destroy it from within. It was a masterstroke of revenge. Steve had sent Richard to sabotage my firm, knowing that if Vanguard fell, my reputation would crumble along with it. And the best part? They'd made it look like I was the villain all along. I didn't confront Richard right away. Instead, I played dumb, watching him carefully as he moved through the office, smug and confident in his success. But I wasn't about to let them win. I spent every waking hour gathering evidence, digging through emails, phone records, and financial statements. I worked with my legal team to build a case, quietly reaching out to regulators and journalists to set the record straight. The final blow came during an all-hands meeting I called one Friday afternoon. The entire office was there, including Richard and his cronies, all of them looking suspiciously calm. "Before we begin," I said, standing at the head of the conference table, "I have a little announcement." I turned to the large screen behind me and clicked a button on my remote. The room fell silent as the screen filled with emails and financial reports, documents proving Richard's involvement in the fraud. "These," I said, my voice calm but firm, "are the actions of people who thought they could manipulate this company for their own gain. People who thought I wouldn't notice. People who thought they could get away with it." Richard's face turned a deep shade of red. "What is this nonsense?" he snapped, but his voice wavered. "Oh, it's far from nonsense," I replied. "It's all here, every shady deal, every offshore account, every conversation you had with Steve Harris about how to bring me down. You didn't just betray me, Richard. You betrayed everyone in this room." The silence was deafening. My employees looked at Richard with a mix of shock and fury. "I've already handed everything over to the authorities," I continued. "By the time you leave this office, the SEC will be waiting for you." Richard stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "You can't prove anything," he spat, but his voice lacked conviction. I smiled. "Oh, I can. And I have. Good luck, Richard." The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard and his team were arrested, and the scandal made headlines for weeks. Steve's involvement was exposed as well, dragging Zenith even further into the mud. But the damage to Vanguard was done. Despite my efforts to clear my name, the trust I built with my clients was shattered. Many of them had already moved their accounts elsewhere, unwilling to take the risk of staying with a firm tainted by scandal. In the end, I made the hardest decision of my life. I shut Vanguard Strategies down. I'd lost the company I'd built from the ground up, but I wasn't defeated. If anything, the experience had taught me just how far people would go to tear you down, and just how resilient I could be. Months later, as I sat in a small cafe, reviewing job offers from some of the biggest names in finance, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert: former CEO of Zenith Capital, Steve Harris, indicted for fraud. I read the article with a smirk. Turns out, Richard's betrayal hadn't just destroyed Vanguard, it had also exposed years of corruption at Zenith. Steve's empire was crumbling, and this time, there was no one to bail him out. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. I may have lost the battle, but in the end, Steve and Richard had lost everything. And me? I was just getting started.